Hello. Welcome to Examining Fictional Heroes and the Authors Behind Them. My name is Wayne Browder. Today, I'm going to make a slight diversion from what I normally do. I'm going to do one for the ladies. But don't worry, guys. There's still plenty of good meat in here for you as well. There's several reasons why I'm doing this. Reason number one being, I like the story. Because if I don't like the story, I'm not going to deal with it. But I want to say that similar to the reasons I laid out in episode 1 as to why I started this video series, the trend in our society today, in movies, in television, in books, even in commercials, you see some woman dragging some useless male through life. Boys are being taught that it's okay for them to be weak and submissive and docile. And women are being told, girls are being told, they need to be strong. They need to be leaders. They need to take charge. Now, I haven't gotten comments on my video series like this, but I have made comments on videos, posts I find on Facebook sometimes about the trend of these movies. And I don't necessarily have a problem with a movie that has a female lead. Once again, the problem lies in her being the fighter, her being the problem solver, him just being a dope that's following her around. I say that trend is not good for boys and it's not good for girls. No girl needs to drag some useless guy through life. And the ones who try it eventually get tired and they cut the guy loose. And if the guy is lucky, he'll figure it out and he'll start straightening himself up. In this story, we deal with a girl named Julie Marat. She is in a situation where she has to be strong and she has to protect herself. She's in this situation because she married a man that was no good. So there's going to be 3 examples of guys in this story. One is Julie's father, who was a good man. One is her weak and ineffective husband, who was not a good man. Lastly, we have Pete Kubelik, who was a trader at a lonely station on the coast of South America. He was a bully. He was the tyrant of a small area that he literally ruled over. So, and this story is called By the Waters of San Tadeo. You can find this story in this volume of short stories by Louis L'Amour, Beyond the Great Snow Mountains. There are two short stories in this book that center on a strong female lead. The first one, By the Waters of San Tadeo, and the last one. And I really enjoy the last one as well. I hope to get to it someday. But I've got a lot to go over in this story today. So I will be taking excerpts from it, and I will try to be brief while making the points that I need to make. The dozen shacks that made up the village of San Esteban huddled, dwarfed and miserable, below the craggy ramparts that walled them away from the world. The lofty circle of mountains, with their ice-choked ravines and thick tangles of beech forest, formed an enclosing wall as impassable as the mountains of the moon. Only in one direction was escape from the village possible, through the narrow mouth of the inlet, 8 miles from the village. Julie Murat had thought of all of that many times in the last few weeks, and each time she had come to the same conclusion. And each time that conclusion was just as hopeless. There was but one way of escape: by boat. There were 3 boats at the inlet, and all of these belonged to Pete Kubelik. One was the schooner that he used for infrequent trips up the coast and to bring in supplies. There were also 2 fishing boats, not much more than dinghies, far too small in which to brave the sea that lay outside. Yet escape she must, and immediately. Returning to the bedside, she looked down at the dying man who was her father. Lovable, impractical, and a dreamer with an always restless heart, George Murat had never been able to remain still. Now, this lonely inlet far south on the coast of Chile had trapped him, and once there, he could not leave. 2 things ensured that. One was his own health, which failed rapidly in the cold, dreary world of San Esteban. Yet had it been his health alone, Julie could have managed. The other element was Pete Kubelik. From the moment they drew their ketch up to the jetty, and Julie turned to look into the pig-like eyes of the big trader, she had been frightened. Right then she asked her father to leave, knowing that this was not a place they should stay. He was amazed. "Why, Julie? We've only just come. We can at least look around, can't we?" "No, Father, please. Let's go find somewhere else." Her father had turned to face Kubelik, and the big man's brown face wrinkled in a smile. "I'm afraid my daughter doesn't like it here," he confessed. "Well," Kubelik replied, "it ain't much of a place for a woman, that's true. But there's gold here, plenty of it." "Gold?" Her heart sank at the eagerness in her father's voice. What would he do if he found it, she wondered. No man ever cared less for money, but in her father's mind, the concept of gold was so much more than money. It was the reward that he was searching for, the last reward that would somehow repair the life that luck had deserted. But ironically, that life without luck was not his. It was hers. Plodding along beside her father, Kubelik had dwarfed him with his huge body. His face was round and moon-like under the thick black beard. Wrinkles ran out in a network of tiny lines from the corners of both eyes that were small and cruel. His hands were dirty, his fingernails black and broken. And then for the first time she'd seen the gun. It was in a holster under his sheepskin coat. Not until later did Julie wonder that none of the others came near them. By midnight, they had moved into the inner room at Kubelik's station and to bed. They had met only one other man. He was a pasty Austrian named Rudy and seemed to be Kubelik's shadow. He rarely spoke, but whenever Kubelik and Rudy shared a look, Julie realized there was some secret communication. She saw other people moving around the shacks, but they did not come near the store. The inner room had been Pete Kubelik's suggestion. She had wanted to return to the boat, hoping that her father could be talked into leaving. But Kubelik laughed at her and waved her objections away with an impatient hand. He would take it as an insult, he said. By all means, they should stay. Entranced by his stories of the coast, her father listened, and they remained. And in the morning, their boat was gone. So, they were going to search for the boat, and Julie's father asked him to take them up the coast, and he would pay. And he said possibly in a week or so, when he's ready to go for supplies. But that day never came. I'm sorry, Julie, George said. When I get well, we'll get out of here and I'll make it up to you. He coughed, the breath rattling deep in his lungs. Get some rest, she said. He nodded and relaxed, breathing more easily. She sat there in the dark, a 26-year-old woman who had failed in life, failed in marriage, who had fled back to her father, a ne'er-do-well adventurer, and ended up here in a narrow fjord at the end of the earth. Like many young girls, Julie had thought that marriage would change her life, and indeed it had. But she discovered that the qualities in a man that had appealed to her when she was being courted were not the qualities that made a good partner for life. Her husband had been a dashing young bohemian who could quote enough Spencer, Marx, or Freud to prove any point. Unfortunately, for all his obsession with the working man, he could not seem to hold a job. What she had mistaken for intensity turned out to be self-obsession. And the wild ways that she once thought were delightfully liberated proved to be simple self-indulgence. After 6 months, he had disappeared to prowl the bars and jazz clubs of San Francisco by himself, and she fled back to her father in shame. Julie hid herself away from the world on her father's boat, ashamed because she had not been wise enough to choose the right man and hadn't been strong enough to confront that man about their problems. George Murat had never questioned her, although he had made many a poor choice himself, and life had dealt him many a blow. he still met the morning with a smile and fixed his eyes on the horizon. And there is a good lesson to learn. Don't let life get you down when it hits you, because it will. But now they were here in this dismal settlement, and George Murat was very sick. Julie put her father to bed and hurried to the store for medicine. Pete Kubelik shook his head. "Medicine," he said. "Ain't got much. Aspirin and some cold tablets. Anything more I can do, let me know." He came around the counter and leaned against it. Despite her fear, she forced herself to stand still, but couldn't look him in the eye. "You know," he said, "we could get along, you and me. Gets mighty lonesome here of a winter." In the corner, Rudy stifled a whispering laugh. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kubelik. I couldn't do that. When Father gets well, we will leave." "Suppose he doesn't get well?" Cold fear welled up within her. "Oh, he will," she said firmly. "He often has touches of cold like this. He'll get well, and then we'll leave." "Well, maybe," he said, "if I decide to take you up the coast. Then again, I may just keep you here, sort of company for me." "That's ridiculous." She looked up at him for the first time. "You couldn't get away with anything like that. What about the authorities? The Chileans? The army? The police?" He laughed with genuine amusement. "They don't come here. Know why these folks don't come near you? Because I told them to stay away, that's why. Know why they stay here? Because they can't get away either. They're piling up gold for me. Me and Rudy here." He chuckled. "Why, the government thinks this place is abandoned. Nobody ever comes here. At least," his voice dropped to a whisper, "nobody that goes out again." 2 days later, her father died. But before he did, he managed to tell her that he knew where the boat was because one of the natives had told him. It was raining when they finished the funeral. She started away when the grave had been filled, but Pete Kubelik overtook her. "Get your stuff, whatever you got," he ordered, "and move over to my place." It didn't take much to bring her to tears, but she intentionally pushed her sorrow and terror to the forefront. "Oh, not now, please," she sobbed hysterically, fell to her knees moaning, "My father, my father." She made the most unappealing spectacle of herself possible. Finally, in disgust, he shrugged it off. "All right, tomorrow then." She was rolling up her father's jacket when she found the knife. Evidently, he had planned to use it himself, yet it was no knife she had ever seen aboard the boat. That meant he had acquired it since coming ashore, either finding it or getting it from one of the others. The thought filled her with excitement. Perhaps, if one of the men had given the knife to her father, she might have a friend out there. How could she know who he was? The knife gave her courage. At least she could kill herself. The thought of killing Kubelik came first, but she dismissed the idea at once. He was too big, too strong, and he wore too many thicknesses of clothing. She would never have enough strength to drive the knife home. So, the guy who apparently had given the knife to George Murat came to her window and promised to take her away in exchange for the tobacco that George had brought along to trade. They managed to go through the forest, mostly on deadfalls, crossed a glacier, and found the boat in a river where he had told her father it would be. However, the boat would not start, and she discovered a battery cable missing. So she grabbed her father's gun as Pete Kubelik came aboard, because while they were on the boat, they heard his boat coming. Julie grabbed the carbine and plunged overboard. The icy water hit her like a fist, a cold, solid hammer in her stomach. Down she went, striking out toward the shore, but still sinking. Her clothes, heavy shoes, and 7 pounds of rifle carried her to the muddy bottom. Her ears popped, and she pushed off, hitting the surface and gulping air. She saw a vague shape to her left and grabbed out, her hands scraping along the side of Kubelik's schooner. Her eyes cleared, and looking past the bow, she saw Kubelik stalking along the rail of the ketch, rifle in hand. Julie Murat took a deep breath and sank away from the boat. A couple of strokes, and she felt the bottom again. Then she pushed off and basically got to shore. There was the whip of air by her body, and then the slam of a rifle shot. Pete Kubelik jacked another round into the chamber of his rifle, the spent case bouncing off the deck of the ketch. On the schooner, Rudy came running forward, shotgun in hand. She fell, rather than ran, into the dark space between the trees. "You come back here! You come back or I'll kill you!" Now it was the air that was a freezing fist closing on her lungs. Her sopping clothes clung to her as she slogged, almost knee-deep in moss, deeper into the forest. Even as she ran, she was sobbing with fear. Soon she slowed, realizing that she was leaving a trail even a blind man could follow, and found a deadfall like Kuyu had used. She worked her way deeper and deeper into the immense stand of beeches, and finally, shivering, collapsed from exhaustion. Except the cold would kill her. It was still in the mid-40s, but her wet clothes would rapidly give her hypothermia. And in the night, the temperature would drop another 10 or 15 degrees. She tried to hold herself still and quiet her chattering teeth. There was still no sounds of pursuit. From a long crack in a fallen tree, she had access to the trunk, and she found some dry enough wood so that she could strike a fire with the safety matches she had been carrying. She laid out her clothes on the deadfall for them to dry and sat there before her little fire. Shuddering, half frozen and naked, she huddled by the log and prayed for her clothes to dry. In the dark and silent wood, exposed in every way, Julie was sure that this was when Kubelik would find her. He would follow her tracks, even where she tried to make it hard for him. He would smell her fire, he would find her, and she turned and, fumbling with the cartridges, loaded the gun. She put a round in the chamber and set the safety. "Damn you," she whispered. "Damn you, if you come here, I'll kill you." Then she laughed. She laughed at the picture of herself, stark and naked and freezing in a primitive forest, clutching a rifle and daring a man like Pete Kubelik to come and get her. What made it funny was the thought of her husband, champion of the working class, seeing her now. That her often drunk, ineffective coffeehouse Bolshevik could never imagine this, which made her cough out a hard, mean laugh from lips that were set in a snarl. "Come on, damn you." From somewhere inside her, there came a deep well of emotion. Some of it was the loss of her father. Some of it was the fear of this terrible man. Some of it was anger, finally not with herself, but with her no-good husband. But most of it was an emotion that had no name, something ancient and primeval. The feeling that a tiny animal might have when, after being pursued to the end of its endurance, it turns and bares its teeth. Not only does it have to fight, but something inside it has changed. Now, it wants to fight. Morning found Pete Kubelik painfully awake in his room in the San Esteban trade store. He had clumsily fallen off one of the deadfalls that Julie Murat had skillfully negotiated the previous day. Kubelik had sprained his ankle, and now the swelling had become serious and excruciating. He took a swallow from a bottle of vodka he had half finished the night before and limped to the front door of the store. Today, he and Rudy would have to finish up what that damn girl had started, regardless of the pain that shot through him every time he took a step, regardless of the hangover pounding in his temples. He'd find Julie Murat, and if he couldn't make her come back with him, he'd kill her. He'd kill her anyway, but there'd be more pleasure for him if he brought her back alive. He surveyed the long beach and the high cliffs. Time to get moving. He shook his head, trying to clear it, but that movement made his vision blur with pain. Maybe he'd just kill her. An invisible club knocked Pete Kubelik's bad leg out from under him. He went face down in the sand, gasping in shock. He lurched around trying to sit up, even as the crack of the shot echoed back from the cliffs. Looking down, he saw blood welling from a hole dead center in his knee. He clawed for the pistol behind his hip. Down on the beach, less than 100 yards from the door of his store, the dark sand moved and shook. Julie Murat stood up from the place where she had lain, half buried through the night, the sights of her father's old carbine trained on Kubelik's front door. She worked the bolts on the rifle, and when Rudy came charging out of the building, shotgun in hand, she shot him in the stomach. Then she started forward. Kubelik half raised the .45, but she spoke before he could bring it to bear. "Don't. I won't kill you if you throw it away." She picked the gun up. "I came back for my battery cable," she said. "You shouldn't have taken it or stolen our boat." She went up to the store and took the bolt from Kubelik's rifle. Then, using a rock, she beat the hammers from the trader's shotguns. The cable she eventually found lying on the deck of the schooner. She fired up the schooner's auxiliary and threw off the lines. Several of the other inhabitants of the station had come down to the water and were watching her curiously. She called out to them, "I'll leave this boat in the mouth of the San Tadeo River if you want it." They looked at her as she turned and headed down the inlet and toward the Gulf. The last time she looked back, they had walked over to where Pete Kubelik lay in the sand. They had all taken up sticks or rocks, but they were not striking him. They were just standing there. Finally, they slipped out of sight as she rounded the headland and started down to the sea. I know that was a bit long. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed me reading it, parts of it. As you can see, there's a lot that we could learn from, a lot we can dive into. We saw that the man she married was not a good man. He was very much, by description, like a lot of the kids who are coming up today. They learn all this useless stuff and they talk, but they never do anything. And it's always someone else's fault. And then there are guys like Kubelik. He was a bully and he was a tyrant. And he had all those people there slaving for him and living in fear of him. But once again, it's worth saying, Julie would not have had to face a man like Kubelik had she married a good man in the first place. Her father had tried to take her away from all that and take her mind off what she saw as her failures. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I appreciate you listening. You can leave any likes or comments or dislikes or anything of that nature. And I'd love to address anything. And I appreciate your time. Have a good day.